we've been looking at how to improve the composition of our images and what we need to look for. We started looking at the aspects that contribute to a wonderful image, and everyone always thinks it's a good camera, which is half of the component, is actually thinking about aspects of our camera. But the other half of the component of making a fabulous design is ourselves, our imagination and our way of thinking about image design. What we looked at last week was, how did we harness this bit? How did we harness the fairy dust? We said that before you even started shooting, you need to think about what you wanted to shoot. And we had an example of this subject that I saw walking through Palermo, and what I designed, that where I needed him to be, and I had to follow him for 2 hours to get him to be where I needed him to be. That was the first week. The next time we talked about really thinking about why you're picking up the camera in the first place. If you've seen something and you're picking up the camera, you just need to go through the thinking process of, what do you want the image to say? What emotion do you want it to portray? And it may be just something like gorgeous colours. There's some absolutely stunning colours here, and I'd really like to capture them. That's all you need to think about, and then make sure that you do capture them appropriately. Every shot is about thinking about it beforehand, planning what is going to go into that shot, technically designing it, and that may mean changing the lens on your camera, thinking about the technology in terms of depth of field, etc., then actually shooting it, then reviewing what you've done, checking it, test it against what you thought or hoped to get out of that image, and then go on and shoot another one, or alternatively go back again and go, what in that series of steps did I fail to do correctly that I haven't got the image that I wanted? What's been interesting in listening to you talk about your images that we've taken on workshops is that you're all starting to tell me why you took it, which is fantastic, because it means that you're consciously thinking before you press the button. If you can tell me what you wanted to get versus whether you actually got it, that then allows me to give you feedback on what you've missed out of, in whether it may be the technical side, that you failed to set your camera appropriately, or it may be just where you stood or the angle you had your camera. It could be a number of things of why you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. We went through all of that, and I asked you for your next workshop to actually pre-visualize before you took the shot of what it could be. And one of the best ways to get good at pre-visualizing is to be image literate. It's a bit like if you went to write a story, you've usually got an idea of how these types of stories are normally written because you read a lot of them. Or if you want to write a magazine article, you study other magazine articles and see how they structure a short story within a magazine article, how they develop an argument, how they conclude a story. And the same thing is with images. If you want to create a fabulous image, become image literate. Look at images everywhere. They're all around it. They're on billboards, they're in magazines, they're in newspapers, they're on television. Every single frame that you watch on television has been composed. It's really interesting once you start to know aspects of good image design. You can start to pick up consciously how the photographer has aligned themselves to the subject or the light to get the best out of that particular image. That's other homework for you to do for the rest of your life, is don't just look at images, just don't go nice picture, nice picture, nice picture. If you like something, if something stops you in your tracks and you go, this is really good, why? What did that photographer do to make me stop and look at it and want to keep looking at it, or show someone else and go, isn't this a great shot? That's your image literacy, and that's your lifelong homework. That's all the concepts. That's you picking up the camera and those thoughts going through your head. Now we're actually going to get to the execution, and we still haven't got to press the button, and we still won't even today get to press the button, because the next bit is about image design, where you need to work out what's in and what's out and the perspective that you actually take the shot. I found I'm constantly exploring what are the similarities and differences between a photographer and an artist, because I see so many more similarities than I see differences. But I thought this was a really interesting concept, that as photographers, it's a reductive art in that we get to decide what we leave out of an image, whereas a painter or an artist starts with a blank canvas and they decide what they want to put into an image. I'm not sure who's lucky, because the artist can remove those distractive elements that we're constantly trying to remove. But we're lucky is that we actually pick up our camera because we see a great composition. We see something that looks amazing. And I think that's why I ended up as a photographer, not an artist, is I can see when something's good. I just struggle to start with nothing and make it good. So if you're that sort of person that can recognize beautiful architecture or lovely images when you see them, then photography's for you. If you're someone that doesn't like something prescriptive and already built for you, then art is for you. When we're trying to work out what's in and what's out, it's the frame that determines it. And it's really interesting that, yes, we can crop later, and we're going to talk a lot about cropping and what we need to do in cropping. But the most powerful crop you will ever do is that cropping in camera. Our sensors now have got very large, and it means we have a lot of information in our image. And that allows us to crop down quite small and still have something that looks okay on the screen. Because my image sensor is 45 megabyte, I started off with a 2 megabyte camera. And so you can see I can crop it down to about a 20th of its size. And that's what we used to consider to be a good image. But it looks cropped. How many times have I said to you guys when you show me a photo, did you crop this? And it's really interesting. I think that we expect a certain softness at the edges. This is just intuitively with the way lenses work. They're always a bit softer at the edges. And they also distort to magnify at the edges. Just like we read body language intuitively, we intuitively read image language and can tell if it's cut. When you crop too tightly into an image, it starts to destroy the image, just not from a pixel and information perspective, but also from a visual perspective of aesthetics. So we're going to talk about cropping in camera. One of the first things that I want you to do is make sure, and this is part of your homework, is turn on the grids display in your viewfinder. This is what I mean, okay? It's a grid actually on your camera, and we'll talk about why that's important. But that's step number one, is always have that grid display turned on. The next thing is you've already come to this shoot, this particular shot, with an idea in mind, because you've picked up the camera in the first place. So you've got a story or something, a narrative, and it may be, I would just want to catch the excitement of this kid as he catches the ball. The narratives don't need to be complex or intellectual or conceptual or anything. They just need to be a reason for picking up the camera. The first thing you do is crop in camera. You zoom in to make sure that all of the elements around catching the excitement of that child catching the ball are there. So that means the ball has to be in it. So you need to sort of frame it up so the ball's in it, and you may want to put some context in it as well. They may be in a playground or something, and so you just make it a little bit wider just to put a little bit of context in. But you don't want the basketball game next door, the right-hand side of the image. It is not contributing to the story at all. You just want to zoom to get that frame to be the right size. Now, I shoot often with my prime lenses, and prime lenses are ones that don't zoom. Now, you can't zoom on those lenses. What you get in your frame is what you get in your frame. So what I say then is zoom with your feet. Walk forward, walk back until you get that frame right. Move yourself or the subject if you can't get everything in. So sometimes if you are doing a portrait or you are taking a photo of a flower or something, you may need to move yourself or the subject in order to get it all in. Because it may be that the light is a particular way, you need to move it, the camera, and yourself in order to get all three working together. Remove anything unwanted. When I'm shooting in my garden, I've always got my secateurs with me. Even in Kew Gardens, if there's a branch in the way, I'll just tuck it behind another branch and then shoot. And then when I finish, tuck it back. No harm done. If there's dead leaves, more to do with my life than removing dead leaves using Photoshop. Probably take me about an hour. Takes me 2 seconds to just brush off a statue and make it clean. I'm a terror in a public place for shifting dustbins because they're in the way of my shot. I'll shift them, take the shot, go back, put them back where they were. So in public places, shift stuff. If it's not right, move it. And then do the honourable thing and shift it back. Trying to fix it in Photoshop, the last thing you want if you are having your image judged is for them to go, what's that weird bit there where that doesn't match? And that's where you took out the dustbin. When you do finish shooting, you'll notice that I do look at the back of the camera. I'm never looking at the exposure. Only look at the histogram for exposure. What I'm looking at is the edge of frame. Making sure that edge of frame is in a logical position, that there's not a branch sort of suddenly poking into the edge of frame. And if there is, far easier than getting rid of it in Photoshop is just change your angle ever so fractionally and get it out. When you're looking at the back of the frame and you see there is posts coming out of the back of their head, well, that may mean that you need to get up higher and actually get them to cover the post, or get to one side so the post is actually sort of out of frame, and that way you can fix it. They're the things you can't fix later. If you know that you need to straighten an image, and given the fact that we tend to take buildings with a wide angle lens, wide angle lenses, keystone buildings, distort them so they look like pyramids. And we know that if we try and straighten that, and there's really good ways within Lightroom and Photoshop to straighten a building, we actually need extra room at the top. Because as soon as we go to straighten, we start to lose height. And so if you recognize within a shot, as you're framing it up, that this, and you don't see it through the viewfinder, you don't seem to get the same distortion as what you will when you finally shoot it, then just allow extra room around it. So decide what your crop is, and then just zoom out a bit to give you that extra room when you're actually going to be straightening something. If you can crop in camera, it means that you save yourself a good portion of your life in editing. But not only that, if you do want to put this image on the wall, and a number of you have shown me images that you really love that you've taken and you want to print them, then if you're going to print, you need every pixel you can get in that image, because you'll see it in a print. You'll see that you've cropped it. You'll see that it's pixelated. If you can crop in camera, your sensor is then saturated with all of the information that you've captured. And when you expand it out to a print, you've got the quality there to do that. And the thing is, you never know when that's going to be. You never know when you're going to hit that button and you're going to get the most amazing expression on someone's face, or capture something that is absolutely extraordinary. You don't want to have had your lens zoomed out to this, but the extraordinary is this big. And this is just a reminder. Remember, if it's not part of your intended story, leave it out of the frame. I've seen some fabulous images that have two stories in them. And as the viewer, I'm not quite sure what the photographer is trying to tell me. Are they trying to tell me both stories? And if so, they don't work. A bit like the little boy catching the ball in the basketball game next door. If half the frame is filled with the basketball game, or half the image is the little boy catching a football, what's the story? It's certainly not the one you envisaged. When you're framing up, look right around the edges and just check. If it's not part of the story, get it out. And the same later when you're cropping. If it's not part of the story, get it out. This is what I mean when you display the grid on the back of your camera. And this is in the menu. It's a menu option for your display. So this is the grid that you should be seeing on the back of your camera. There's different types of grids you can display. We're going to be talking about the rule of thirds when we're going to be talking about layout, but the rule of thirds is the go-to grid display to have on the back of your camera. For what I use it for, lining up your verticals, I tended to always shoot with a 15-degree slant on every single photo I took. It was like I leant down like this to take a photo. I had to straighten every single photo. With the grid, discipline myself now before I do the final finger press to just find something vertical in the shot and line the grid line up to it. You know, just when you straighten an image and you lose the key aspect of your image because you had to straighten it. So just line up your horizon along one of the horizontal lines. We typically don't put the horizon in the middle. Your horizon usually sits on either of those thirds. So this allows you, then you don't have to crop later. You can just line it up when you're actually looking at it. Look at rule of thirds. We'll have a look at these intersection points here, and they're really key to having key components of your image actually located. We've now thought about framing and zooming and cropping the image to see what's in, what's out. We also need to work out whether we're going to be shooting in portrait mode, which is your camera sort of up and down, or whether we're going to be shooting with your camera in landscape mode. And unfortunately, those two names, people say to me, oh, but I can't shoot a portrait in landscape mode. Or I can't shoot a landscape in portrait mode. It's got nothing to do with the subject. It's got everything to do with the shape of the frame. And I'm going to show you that it's all about the subject and the composition. It's got nothing to do with the fact if it's people or whether it's landscape. And the other thing is square crops are very interesting. We typically see the 1 to 1.6 ratio of a rectangular frame, but a square frame works really well when something is very symmetrical, just because the symmetry of reinforces the symmetry of the object. And so if you're taking a picture of a flower and it's completely filling the frame, a square frame looks fabulous. And it also looks really modern. So when you are framing up, and you can set it in your camera to shoot square if you want to. It still fills all the sensor, but it just gives you a look of shooting square. Try and imagine in your mind what a square crop would be, and just put your subject square in the middle. The frame shape will depend on the subject shape, what you're trying to portray, how the image will be used. If you're going to be putting images on screens, they're typically landscape works best because screens are landscape. And we often see this in television when people have filmed something on their mobile phone and then decided to use the film that a person has decided to take, and it's in portrait mode. For heaven's sake, it takes nothing to make it in landscape mode. So that's just something to think about. How is this going to be used? Am I going to be putting it on my website where everything is, all screens are landscape shaped? I don't tend to post on Instagram, but I think Instagram's mostly portrait mode. Where is it going to go, of what shape it needs to be? And if you like doing books, the template that you use for your books, is it mostly portrait or landscape? And if you're shooting a particular trip that you're taking, you just need to think about how's it going to work. This is to dispel the idea of portrait and landscape. It depends on the aesthetics. All of these, I've chosen whether I shot it landscape or portrait based on how does the subject fit within that frame and what's the best composition. The aspect ratio is what we're talking about when we talk about whether it's rectangular or square and whether it's portrait or a landscape. All of that has to be thought about before you press the button. You can't think about it later because you then end up cropping the image to a shape that it doesn't quite work, and you end up losing pixels and probably losing parts of bodies trying to get it to fit around what you want to fit it around. 9 out of 10 times when people shoot a landscape, they shoot it in landscape mode. Dombrowski was a Tasmanian landscape photographer. He did beautiful work. He shot most of his landscapes in portrait mode, enabled you to dive into the image. He used a large format camera which had a really long depth of field in it, and everything was in focus right throughout the image, and it was beautiful. It just told layers and layers and layers of stories. Don't be confined to landscape, holding your camera this way. Turn it up. That goes for almost any image you take. If you've got the time and you've taken one and you think, yeah, that looks fabulous, pleased with that, just try it in landscape or portrait. Just switch it up. Whichever way you've taken it, just take another one and see how does it work better that way rather than that way. And also think about diptychs as well. This image down here is actually not a diptych. I took it as a landscape mode, but it struck me when I saw the image that it would look better as a diptych. Think about diptychs and things like that as well while you're shooting. There's often 2 different ways of looking at something, and it would look better as a diptych that you actually have the 2 together, and then you need to think about them, shooting them in so that they look okay as a square. So this is tips for shooting. Yes, you've got the landscape mode or you've got the portrait mode, but you can't get everything in. And you know what this is like. The only way I could get this full lighthouse in was being way, way back, but I want to get an up-close shot. So what do? You take lots of shots. And whenever I'm shooting something long and vertical, I shoot it in landscape mode. And you can see that way, it gives me heaps of room when I want to straighten it. So when I merge it to panorama, I merge it with perspective as being the overriding option. So when you see things like this, don't go, I haven't got a lens wide enough, or I can't capture that like I want to capture it. Think creatively. Blue Mountains, my God, the panorama, you don't see little bits in the Blue Mountains, you see everything. Right. It's like capturing the Grand Canyon. And I saw this seahorse type shape there in the background where the sun was highlighting it, but I wanted it to be put within its surroundings. And there's a lovely shaft of light coming back down. I don't know if you can see those rays of light coming back through the clouds. I wanted everything. I just shot. But I shot it in portrait mode because that allowed me to get the full layered landscape all the way through. Now, all you do is brace yourself and just turn fractionally, and you can see it fractionally. I try and overlap these photos as much as I can because when Lightroom is trying to merge them, it needs as much information as it can possibly get, and it costs you nothing to take all these photos. You can delete them from your hard disk when you finish merging. So it's not a hard disk issue either. When you want that very wide shot, this is me at Busselton Pier. This pier is 1.5 kilometres long, very hard to get in one shot, and it's got a swimming area next to it and the afternoon sun. I just like this composition, but I couldn't get it in a wide angle lens. I had a 24mm lens with me, was the largest I got. So again, lots and lots and lots of shots, and I just wanted that long look, so I took it as a panorama. The other option too is, this is the pier from the other side, and you can see how it goes around. I wanted it sharp right through to the back. I had to focus, if I was going to use a wide angle lens, halfway through sort of the image to get sharp foreground, background. So what I decided was just to use a long lens and put it on a very small aperture. I shot this at f7, and then just focused on every part of the pier as I went around, so that when you zoom in, you can see detail in the back of that pier. And so again, portrait mode, compared to what's in that shot, each shot only has a little bit in it. What I want you to do before next week is just look at ways that you can frame a photograph and swap it up. So when we go out and do the workshop next Wednesday, try portrait mode, try landscape mode, try shooting for a panorama. If you see something that you can't fit in one photo, then just stabilize yourself and just take a series of shots, and then in the editing software, say merge to panorama. I'll send you out this homework page and you can just have a think about it. But I hope that's really excited you in thinking how you can be creative with your shooting just from how you frame it.